My name is Layla Ahmed, and I never imagined that I would one day share this story. At 42 years old, I lived what I had always considered to be a blessed life in Aspen, Colorado. I owned a modest yet successful Moroccan restaurant, made my 5 daily prayers a priority, and raised 3 wonderful children alongside my loving husband, Tariq. Skiing had always been my escape, a place where I could clear my mind and connect with nature. Every weekend, I would head to the mountains, drawn by the serene challenge of gliding down those stunning slopes. With 12 years of experience under my belt, I had become quite confident in my abilities. Perhaps too confident. The morning of March 12, 2025, began like any other. I woke early for Far prayer, prepared breakfast for Tariq and our youngest son, Omar, who still lived with us, and gathered my ski gear. The forecast promised clear skies and mild temperatures, ideal conditions for what I planned to be a peaceful solo ski run down a familiar route. As I checked my hijab, carefully securing it under my helmet, a small task I had perfected over the years, I felt a sense of harmony between my faith and my love for the mountains. There, on those slopes, I often found myself contemplating the greatness of Allah, feeling closer to heaven with every descent. The trail I chose that day was one I had skied countless times before, but something felt different. Perhaps it was the soft morning light filtering through the trees, or the eerie stillness in the air. Now, I see that I should have paid attention to these subtle warnings from nature itself. 3 hours into my skiing, at around 2,000 feet, I glided toward what I thought was a solid patch of snow. I had passed this spot many times, but this time, the snow gave way beneath my skis. In an instant, I felt my body lurch forward, and time seemed to stretch out. My safety equipment should have saved me, but the slide had damaged my bindings, leaving me vulnerable. The next moments are a blur, air rushing past me, a strange sense of calm washing over me as I fell, followed by a sharp, searing pain as I collided with a rock. Then, everything went dark. Later, I learned that a group of skiers had discovered me. My body had landed in a small gap between trees, preventing a much more catastrophic fall. But the damage had been done: internal bleeding, multiple fractures, and severe trauma to my spine and skull. The rescue team took over 2 hours to reach me. By the time they arrived, my vital signs were barely detectable. In the helicopter, my heart stopped 3 times. The paramedics later said they had never witnessed anyone fight so fiercely to stay alive. But what they didn't know was that, during those moments when my heart ceased to beat, I experienced something that would forever alter my understanding of everything I believed in. The reality I encountered was vastly different from the teachings I had followed for over 30 years. Reflecting on my life before that fateful day, I see how deeply my faith had shaped me. I had always been dedicated to my religion, teaching my children to follow the 5 pillars of Islam, volunteering at the local mosque, and striving to be a good Muslim. The Quran's teachings were a constant source of comfort, and I never questioned the beliefs I had embraced since childhood. My husband, Tariq, and I had met at university in Morocco before settling in America. Together, we built a life centered on our faith, family, and community. Our restaurant became a popular gathering place for local Muslims, and we took pride in maintaining our traditions in a land far from home. Our eldest daughter, Amina, had recently made us grandparents, and our middle son, Khalil, was set to marry. Life had been good, predictable and secure in its routines. But I could never have imagined that everything I believed in would be shaken so profoundly. That morning, as I kissed Tariq goodbye for his early trip to the mosque, we had made plans to host the family later in the evening, celebrating Omar's acceptance into law school. Instead, they would gather in a hospital waiting room, praying for my survival. It was when my heart was still that I found myself in a place unlike any I had ever known. A place where the physical world seemed distant, almost irrelevant. In this space, I was greeted not by the familiar faces I expected, but by figures that would challenge my understanding of reality. Muhammad, PBUH, and Jesus, PBUH, stood before me, their presence filled with a profound peace. The encounter was beyond anything I could have ever imagined. The teachings of Islam, the stories I had believed to be absolute truths, these were suddenly put into perspective. I saw the unity in their messages, the shared wisdom of love, compassion, and the recognition of a single creator. It was a revelation that shook me to my core, making me question everything I had known about faith, salvation, and the afterlife. Time had no meaning in that place, but the experience felt both eternal and fleeting. When I returned to my body, struggling to breathe, I understood that death was not the end but a transition, a revelation that would transform my approach to life and death forever. March 12, 2025, was the day my heart stopped, but it also marked the day I was reborn. What followed was a life of renewed understanding, compassion, and a deep, unshakable belief in the interconnectedness of all faiths. If you are not subscribed, I recommend subscribing and activating the notification bell so you don't miss any videos. What happened during those moments when my heart stopped? What truths did I uncover in that terrifying space between life and death? A place where the boundaries of time, faith, and reality blur into an overwhelming, mind-altering silence. The revelations I encountered were far more shocking than anything I had ever dared to imagine. In those brief, haunting moments, I was forced to confront everything I believed about faith, salvation, and the very nature of truth itself. And what I discovered rattled me to my core. I can't seem to shake those final moments before my accident. They replay in my mind like an endless loop, each frame burned into my memory. I remember checking my gear one last time, a ritual I had performed countless times over the years of skiing. The familiar weight of my backpack settled on my shoulders, the snug fit of my boots, the reassuring click of the bindings securing my skis in place. Every detail felt so right, so familiar, yet there was a strange, unshakable feeling of something being off. I'd packed my small prayer mat too, intending to pray doer during my lunch break, something I always did. That day, as always, I was excited about my precious ski time. It was my only escape, my way of connecting with the vast beauty of nature and with Allah. My restaurant, Aisha's Cafe, closed on Tuesdays, making it my sacred day. A day dedicated entirely to the slopes, where I felt truly free, breathing in the cold mountain air and the snow beneath me, and my heart aligned with the natural rhythm of the world. The staff at the cafe, mostly local college students and a few refugees whom I'd come to care for, deeply understood. They knew not to expect me. Tuesdays were my day of worship, my day of peace, my day of uninterrupted connection with the mountains and, in my heart, with Allah. Or so I thought. That morning, as I sipped my tea and prepared for the day ahead, I had a strange conversation with my son, Idris. He had been questioning our faith, asking doubts I didn't know how to answer. "Mom," he asked over breakfast, his voice tinged with uncertainty, "how can we be sure our way is the only right way?" His words struck me like a cold gust of wind, unsettling and unexpected. I could see the doubt in his eyes, the struggle within him. As a mother, I felt a deep, gnawing worry. How could he question something so sacred? I gave him the same answers that had been handed down to me through the years as if they were etched in stone. "Islam is the final revelation, Idris," I told him with unwavering certainty. "Muhammad is the last prophet, and the Quran is perfect, unchanged." But now, in the silence of my thoughts, I can't help but regret how quickly I dismissed his questions. I was so sure, so confident in my understanding. If only I had known then what I know now. But isn't that how it always goes? We humans cling to our certainty until life or death shakes it to its core, revealing how fragile and incomplete our beliefs are. In the skiing community in Aspen, I had earned a reputation as the hijabi skier. Over the years, I had earned the respect of many, mentoring younger Muslim women who, like me, sought to pursue outdoor sports while maintaining their modesty. I had even been featured in a local newspaper article about breaking cultural barriers. The journalist had asked me, somewhat incredulously, if skiing while wearing a hijab was difficult. I had laughed it off, dismissing the question as irrelevant. "Nothing is difficult if you believe it's Allah's will," I'd said with a confident smile. How naive I was. How little I truly understood the depth of faith, and the complexities that lay beyond my comfortable assumptions. My life had been a careful balancing act, trying to live in harmony with my faith and the American culture I had embraced. Aisha's Cafe served halal food exclusively, and we closed during prayer times to make sure we observed our religious duties. During Ramadan, we hosted community iftars. I believed I was living a life that pleased Allah, a good Muslim, doing my best to uphold the tenets of our faith while embracing the best of what the Western world had to offer. On Saturdays, I taught at the weekend Islamic school, helping children learn to recite the Quran, thinking that I was passing on the very truths I had been taught. I knew all the verses about paradise and hell, the stories of Judgment Day, and the terrifying bridge over hellfire that all souls must cross. I recited these teachings with complete conviction, never imagining that I might be wrong. I never questioned it. How could I? I was living the life I believed Allah had set out for me. But what if I had been wrong all along? What if I had been living in a bubble of certainty, surrounded by truths that were half-formed, incomplete? Rebecca, my oldest friend, a devout Christian, had always tried to talk to me about Jesus. Over the years, she had gently, yet persistently, attempted to explain her faith to me, hoping to reach me. But I had always shut her down, politely but firmly. Isa was a great prophet, I would say, using the Arabic name for Jesus. But Muhammad was the last messenger. How ironic that now, in the wake of what I would soon learn, I see those conversations in an entirely new light. I realize now how narrow my understanding had been, how I had refused to see the beauty in the faith of others, convinced that my path was the only right one. The month before my accident, I had a dream that unsettled me. In it, I was skiing down a mountain made entirely of books, religious texts from every corner of the world. As I ascended higher, the books beneath my skis crumbled and fell apart. At the bottom of the mountain stood a figure of light, but I couldn't make out who it was. I had dismissed the dream as nonsense at the time, a random figment of my mind. But now, I wonder, was it a warning? A premonition? Or perhaps a preparation for the revelation that was to come? I can't help but think that I had been blind, caught up in the rituals and certainties of my life, unable to see beyond the surface. And now, in the quiet of my thoughts, I face a truth that I can no longer deny. The world, faith, and truth are far more complex than I ever imagined. In those moments when my heart stopped, I learned that what I believed to be true may not have been the whole story. The question now is, how will I move forward with this newfound understanding? That final morning, as I drove to the slopes, I felt a strange heaviness in the air, one that seemed to cling to my chest and make the usual hum of the car stereo feel distant, almost irrelevant. Yet, when the soft, melodic recitation of Surah Al-Fatiha began to flow from the speakers, the words struck me deeper than they ever had before. The verses about life, death, and judgment, verses I had always found comforting, now felt eerily prophetic, as though they were preparing me for something I couldn't yet understand. And the trumpet shall be blown, and behold, from their graves they shall rush forth to their Lord. These words, which had once been a source of solace, now echoed in my mind with a chilling finality. I remember parking my car, my hands still trembling as I gathered my gear. I checked my phone one last time before starting my ski run. There was a message from Fatima, a new picture of my granddaughter Nadia smiling brightly. Her innocent joy felt like a distant memory now, as if from another lifetime. Youssef had texted me, reminding me to be careful as always, and I saw a missed call from Keed. Just ordinary, everyday moments. How trivial they seemed now, and yet how precious. If only I had known what was coming, I might have lingered on those moments just a little longer, clinging to them with all my heart. The descent began as it always did, routine, mechanical, almost mindless. The snow beneath my skis was rough but familiar. I made the turns with the precision of 1,000 rehearsals, checking my edges, and feeling the rhythm of my movement. I'd skied this exact route countless times, my body knowing every bump, every curve. It was like second nature, a confidence built on years of practice and repetition. That confidence, I now realize, was the very thing that led to my downfall. I didn't see it coming, couldn't have, but I was too sure, too certain that I had mastered the mountain. As I ascended, however, something felt different. A strange unease settled over me. The air felt heavier, charged in a way I couldn't describe. The usual wildlife that filled the slopes with their quiet presence was missing. Even the typical sounds of other skiers, the swoosh of skis against snow, seemed to fade into a haunting silence. It was as if nature itself was holding its breath, waiting for something inevitable to unfold. Then, in an instant, it happened. One moment, I was skiing, and the next, I was falling. It wasn't dramatic or violent. It was almost gentle, as though the earth itself had decided to take me into its embrace. The pain disappeared instantly. I felt weightless, floating as if in a warm pool of water. I looked down and saw my broken body lying in the snow, a detached observer of my tragedy. There was no fear, no panic, just a strange calmness. And then, I noticed it, a silver cord, thin and delicate, connecting me to my physical body. It shimmered like moonlight on water, and I watched, almost fascinated, as rescue workers skied toward me. Their movements seemed slow, dreamlike, as though I were seeing them through the thick haze of a distant memory. I tried to call out, to warn them, to somehow reach out, but no sound escaped my lips. My voice was swallowed by the vast, silent void I had entered. It was then that the tunnel came. Not the peaceful, light-filled passage I had always heard about in stories, but a dark, swirling vortex, pulling at me with an irresistible force. The silver cord snapped, severing my connection to the physical world, and I was drawn in, tumbling through an endless, suffocating darkness. Time lost its meaning. Seconds, minutes, hours, or centuries, they all blurred into one. I couldn't tell how long I had been falling. It felt like an eternity, yet no time at all. In that crushing void, I was overwhelmed by a sense of my sinfulness. Every wrong I had ever committed, every lie, every harsh word, every selfish thought, it paraded through my mind with terrifying clarity. But more than that, more than my sins, was the realization that I had been wrong about something far more profound. A verse from the Quran kept echoing in my mind, repeating itself over and over: "Those who believe, and those who follow the Jewish faith, and the Christians and the Sabians, any who believe in Allah and the Last Day and work righteousness shall have their reward with their Lord." I had always believed this verse to be absolute, to be the final truth. But now, in the darkness, it felt hollow, incomplete. How could this be? Why did it no longer bring me comfort? The darkness eventually gave way to a dim, reddish light, and I found myself standing on an expanse that stretched endlessly in all directions. The ground beneath my feet was black and cracked, like cooling lava, and the air was thick with the acrid scent of sulfur and burning flesh. It was a place of unbearable heat, radiating up through my soles. I looked out across the vast, barren landscape, my heart pounding in my chest as a figure appeared in the distance. At first, I felt a surge of joy, my heart leaping in my chest. Surely, this was the Prophet Muhammad, come to guide me to paradise, just as I had always believed would happen. This was the moment I had imagined for so long. An angel or a prophet coming to take me by the hand and lead me to the light. But as the figure drew closer, my joy turned to dread. Something was wrong. The figure, clothed in a green robe, the familiar beard and noble bearing, it looked like the prophet, but his eyes were empty, like black holes, dead and soulless. There was no warmth, no light in them, only darkness. When he spoke, his voice wasn't the melodious, comforting sound I had imagined. No. It was harsh, grating, like 1,000 nails scraping against stone. My soul recoiled at the sound, and a chill of terror ran through me. This was not what I had expected. This was not the gentle, loving guidance I had hoped for. This was something else entirely. And in that moment, I understood. I understood that my certainty had been an illusion, that everything I had believed, everything I had taken for granted, was far more complex than I could have ever imagined. The journey I was on was not one of simple salvation. It was a journey of reckoning, of truth, and perhaps of redemption. But I had no idea where it would lead. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 1 below to let me know that you are still here with me. He paused, his gaze unwavering, locking onto mine with a weight that made my chest tighten. "Remember this," he said slowly, each word laden with meaning. "Remember that you saw hell first so you could understand the urgency. Every soul that believes the lie ends up here. Every single one of them." The full force of his words hit me with the impact of a physical blow. I was reeling from the gravity of it all. The people I loved, my beautiful daughter Fatima, my brilliant Keed, my gentle Idris, and my beloved Yusuf, each of them was walking the path to eternal torment unless they heard the truth. The implications were unbearable. My heart wrenched, realizing how close I had come to losing them forever. Jesus continued, his voice steady, but with a piercing intensity that I felt deep in my soul. "When you return," he said, "you will face fierce opposition. Many will call you mad. Some will threaten you. Your own family may turn away from you. Are you willing to endure this for the sake of truth? Without a moment's hesitation, I answered, the words escaping my lips with an urgency I couldn't contain. Yes, Lord. Please send me back. I will tell them. I will warn them. His smile, soft and filled with an unfathomable love, pierced through the fear and doubt that still lingered in my heart. Remember this moment, he whispered, his voice like a balm to my wounded soul. Remember what you've seen, and remember that I am. And then, with a gentle touch to my forehead, everything around me went white, blindingly, utterly white. When the light faded, I found myself in a place so different, so overwhelmingly alien, that my mind could scarcely comprehend it. The suffocating heat of hell, which still clung to my skin like a lingering nightmare, was gone. In its place, I was standing in a vast, incomprehensible courtroom. The walls stretched beyond sight, radiating with living light that seemed to pulse and breathe. The ceiling, if there was one, was lost in an unearthly brightness, one that seemed to reach into the very core of existence itself. And there, in the center of it all, was the judgment seat of Christ, vast and awe-inspiring, more magnificent than I could have ever imagined in my limited understanding. Surrounding the throne were millions of beings, angels unlike any I had ever been taught to imagine. Their forms were indescribable, with multiple faces and wings covered in eyes, moving in synchronized patterns that defied the laws of physics. Their continuous cry of, "Holy, holy, holy," reverberated through my entire being, shaking me to my core. It was as if their very voices were calling forth the deep, hidden places in my soul that I had long since tried to forget. Before me, a massive book lay open. The Book of Life. It was not the simple record of deeds I had learned about in Islam, but something far more profound. As the pages turned, I saw my life laid bare in front of me. Not just my actions, but my very thoughts, my deepest motivations, and the ripple effects of every choice I had ever made. I saw myself teaching at the mosque, believing I was guiding others toward truth, but in reality, I was leading them away from salvation. The faces of the children I had taught, their innocent eyes full of trust, now felt like a weight on my chest. Each of them was a soul at risk, each of them potentially bound for the hell I had just witnessed. And then came the most gut-wrenching part of all, the moments when I had encountered the Christian truth and rejected it. I watched myself as a teenager, finding a Bible hidden in my school library, and walking away, convinced it was a corrupted book. I saw my dismissive attitude toward my Christian friends, believing in my pride that I already had the final revelation, unable to see beyond my arrogance. But what crushed me the most were the supernatural battles that had raged around me, battles I had been blind to. I saw angels and demons fighting over my life, over moments when I had felt a strange pull to explore Christianity. Those moments were not coincidences. They were the whispers of the Holy Spirit, trying to reach me, trying to awaken me. But I had ignored them, pushed them aside in my stubbornness. Then, as if the weight of my actions wasn't enough, a voice spoke. It wasn't just a voice, it was a presence, filling the space around me, coming from everywhere and nowhere all at once. "Daughter," the voice said, with a sorrow so deep it seemed to echo through the very fabric of existence. "You have believed a clever deception. The enemy of souls wears many faces, and Islam is one of his finest works." The voice was both terrifying and beautiful, filled with a profound sadness that I felt in the very marrow of my bones. I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that this voice was God the Father himself. Images began to flood my mind, visions of Islam's true origins, the pagan influences that had shaped its practices, and the political motivations behind the Quran's creation. I saw Muhammad receiving his revelations, but now I saw the truth. The dark entity that had appeared to him in the cave was no angel. The fear and torment he experienced afterward were not signs of a true prophet being called, but a reaction to pure evil, something far darker than I had ever been taught. "But why?" I asked, my voice trembling with the weight of the question. "Why did you allow such a powerful deception to flourish?" The answer came, not with mockery, but with an infinite sadness. "Free will," God replied. "Humans must be free to choose or reject the truth. The deception succeeds because it offers what the human heart desires most: control, the illusion of salvation earned through works, a path that caters to pride rather than the humility of surrender." The words reverberated in my heart, each one heavier than the last. I understood now. The truth had always been there, calling out to me. But I had chosen to ignore it, to stay within the comfort of what I had known, even at the cost of my eternal soul. As I stood there, the weight of what I had just witnessed crashing down upon me, I felt the sharp, painful clarity of it all. Before me, vivid scenes from the life of Jesus unfolded. Not the distorted, watered-down version I had been taught in Islam, but the true Christ. The God-man who was born in humility walked among us, performed miracles, and taught with an authority that shook the foundations of all who heard him. But the most devastating truth of all was his death and resurrection, unfolding in front of me with such undeniable truth that I could no longer cling to the lies I had been fed. This was not the tale of a prophet who narrowly escaped crucifixion, as I had once believed. This was God himself, embracing the agony of the cross for the salvation of all humankind. My soul, torn between disbelief and awe, felt both the enormity of this truth and the utter emptiness of all I had been led to believe. It was no longer a question of theology, it was a matter of life and death. The scenes continued, showing the early Christian church in all its purity, the way it spread against all odds, driven by the truth of the resurrection. But as I watched, my heart sank further as the rise of Islam began to appear. The truth was twisted, and I saw how this new religion, born out of a complex mix of Christianity, Judaism, and Arabian paganism, deceptively borrowed elements of truth, blending them with falsehood so carefully that only those who were truly seeking could recognize the lie. The worst part? The fear, the indoctrination, the gradual erasure of critical thought. I saw how the mere whisper that the Quran might not be perfect could spark violent retribution. The pressure to conform, to silence any doubts, kept millions trapped in a system that promised salvation but delivered only bondage. Then, a chilling command rang out from the voice, deep and sorrowful. "Watch carefully." My vision shifted, and I found myself looking at the sprawling tapestry of my family history. Generations upon generations of sincere Muslims, each one deceived by the same powerful lie, were now trapped in that terrible place I had just seen. But amid this bleak vision, there was a flicker of hope. Scattered across the generations were small points of light. These, the voice explained with unbearable sadness, were moments when ancestors encountered my truth. Each light represents an opportunity for salvation that was rejected. I saw my great-grandmother speaking with Christian missionaries in Pakistan. I saw my grandfather, lost in thought, holding a Bible tract he had found on the streets of Casablanca, only to dismiss it. I saw my mother, plagued by a vivid dream of Jesus, but brushing it off as a work of shaitan. Every missed opportunity was a weight on my heart. Each decision, each rejection, rippled through time, touching the lives of those who came after them, including my children. Then came the most devastating vision of all. The future I feared. I saw Fatima, my beloved daughter, raising my granddaughter in the same deception that had held me captive for so long. I saw Kai growing more radicalized, consumed by blind faith, unable to question. And Idris, my sweet, thoughtful Idris, questioning everything, only to be silenced by fear and the unrelenting pressure of our community. My heart shattered as I saw their futures, and the futures of their children, locked in a cycle of deception and despair. But then, with a wave of sorrowful hope, the voice said, "But this could be." The scene shifted, and I saw an alternative reality. A reality where I returned and shared what I had learned. The path wasn't easy. My family rejected me. The seeds of truth were sown in the hardest soil, but they began to take root. I saw Idris, once confused, searching for answers, willing to look beyond what he had been taught. Foda, with a heart full of courage, sought the truth for herself after watching my transformation. Keed, initially furious, finally found the courage to ask the questions he had suppressed. It was messy and painful, but in the end, it was beautiful. "Your suffering will have a purpose," the voice continued, his words full of an infinite love that pierced through the chaos of my emotions. "Every tear, every rejection, every persecution will water the seeds of truth you plant." The scene expanded, showing not just my family, but members of our mosque, regular customers at our restaurant, and even our friends in the Muslim community. Some would curse me, others would secretly begin to question, and over time, more and more would come to see the truth. The changes would be slow, but they would come. "But understand," the voice warned, the weight of reality sinking in, "the enemy will fight against you. You have seen his deception. and he will not allow you to expose it without resistance. The scenes that followed were heavy with pain, death threats, vandalized property, and the crushing isolation of being rejected by those I loved. I saw myself crying in despair, alone, battered by the world. But then, amid the darkness, I saw something more powerful: the quiet, invisible impact. People watching from the shadows, seeing my faith tested, witnessing my refusal to back down, silently questioning, and finding the courage to follow the truth. "The choice is yours," the voice said, gentle yet firm. "I will not force you. You can rest now, or you can return and face these trials for the sake of those you love." Without hesitation, I knew what I had to do. "Send me back," I said, my voice trembling but resolute. "No matter the cost." In an instant, the scene shifted again. I found myself standing in what appeared to be a vast, endless library. Books of every shape and size filled the endless walls, reaching far beyond what my eyes could see. "These," the voice said, "are the questions you will need answers for. Study them carefully." Information poured into my mind like a flood. Answers to every Islamic argument I had ever used, facts and evidence I had never known, archaeological discoveries that contradicted the claims I had once defended. I understood finally why the Trinity was not polytheism, why the Incarnation was essential for salvation, and why blood atonement was necessary to reconcile God's justice and mercy. What had once seemed absurd was now clear, and my soul rejoiced in the beauty of it all. "You will not remember everything consciously," the voice added, his words full of grace. "But it will be there when you need it. The Spirit will bring it to your remembrance." And with that, the vision faded. But I was no longer the same. My soul had been awakened, and there was no turning back. There was another shift, a sudden change, and once again, I found myself standing before him, before Jesus. But this time, it was different, so profoundly different. This wasn't the gentle, soft-spoken prophet I had encountered in Islamic teachings. This wasn't the pale, almost fragile figure I had seen portrayed in countless Christian paintings. No, this was the Lion of Judah, the mighty King of Kings, radiating a power that left me breathless, yet still, an undeniable tenderness that pierced deep into my soul. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 2 below to let me know that you are still here with me. "My daughter," he said, and his voice was an incredible blend of infinite tenderness and absolute authority. I could feel both the power of his divinity and the unshakable love he held for me, and all of humanity. "You will suffer for my name's sake, but remember, I suffered first. And I will be with you through everything that comes." His words echoed in my being, settling into the very core of who I was. He reached out, his hand warm and comforting, and placed his touch on my forehead. At that moment, something miraculous happened. It wasn't just knowledge that entered my mind, it wasn't just facts or doctrine or theology, it was him that entered me. I felt as if his very essence was seared into the depths of my soul. I suddenly knew him, truly knew him, on a level deeper than I could ever have imagined. Not the distant Jesus of my misconceptions, but the living, breathing God whose love knows no bounds. A love that had always been there, waiting for me to see, to understand. And in that moment, I knew with unshakable certainty. This was the truth I had been desperately seeking my entire life, but I had been looking in all the wrong places. "Your time to return has come," he said softly, and my heart sank at the thought of leaving him. But he continued, "But first, watch one more thing." A vision unfolded before me, like a split screen showing 2 separate futures. One was a future where I had never experienced this moment, still bound by the chains of Islam, where I faced the eternal horrors I had once witnessed in my dreams, despair, agony, and unending darkness. The other was a future where I had chosen Christ, where I lived a life of sharing his love and truth, where I was surrounded by family, by loved ones, all of whom had found salvation through my testimony. The contrast was stark, so incredibly stark that it made my heart ache. "The difference between these 2 futures," Jesus spoke, his voice both kind and firm, "is what you do with what you've seen today. Choose wisely." The weight of his words was heavy on me, almost suffocating. And just as the vision began to fade, I felt myself being gently pulled back toward the earthly realm, to the body I had left behind. But before everything disappeared, Before I could even process the gravity of what I had just seen, I heard his voice one final time. Remember, you've seen these things not for yourself alone, but for the sake of those still trapped in darkness. Your life is no longer your own. The power of that declaration washed over me as if all the pieces of my life had finally fallen into place. I now understood with absolute clarity. Every moment of my life, being born into a Muslim family, living in America, even owning a restaurant that connected me to a community of people, had all been part of a divine plan. God had orchestrated my entire existence, positioning me perfectly to reach people who would never listen to a born Christian. Even my skiing accident, which had seemed like nothing but a tragic event, had been part of this beautiful, intricate design. The last thing I heard as I was being pulled back to my physical body was the sweet, angelic chorus of voices singing in harmony. The song was unlike anything I had ever heard. It was a song of joy, a celebration that shook the very foundations of my being. It was the kind of song that words could never capture. Pure, untainted, and filled with the love of heaven itself. It was a song of rejoicing over every sinner who repents, over every lost sheep who returns to the true shepherd. The beauty of that song, the peace it carried, will forever echo in the deepest corners of my soul. And then, the transition back to my body was nothing short of agonizing. After experiencing the freedom of being in spiritual form, returning to my flesh felt like being suffocated, squeezed into a suffocating suit of wet concrete. Every nerve in my body screamed in protest as consciousness began to flood back. The first thing I became aware of was the constant beep of the hospital machines around me. Then, the pain hit, waves of it crashing over me, sharp and relentless. But even amidst the pain, there was something that brought me comfort, something that gave me the strength to keep going. It was the object, sitting quietly beside me, reminding me of the miraculous nature of my survival. The doctors marveled at how I had pulled through, calling it nothing short of a miracle. But little did they know, their words held a deeper truth than they could ever understand. My injuries, and the severity of the accident, should have claimed my life. But I was here, alive, not by chance, but by divine intervention. Sent back, not just to live physically, but to fulfill a much greater purpose. After a week, the breathing tube was removed, and as I lay there, recovering, I knew I had to be careful with what I shared. I couldn't just tell everyone about the extraordinary experience I had just gone through while still drugged up and groggy. I needed to be strategic, to wait for the right moment. I watched and listened, trying to gauge when the time would be right to share the most important story of my life. But deep in my heart, I knew one thing for certain. Everything in my life had led to this moment. And I was no longer just living for myself. I had seen the truth, and now, it was my turn to share it with the world. I began to realize just how deeply rooted my family was in Islamic beliefs, how every single aspect of their lives seemed to be woven into its practices. It was as though they lived and breathed Islam, and everything they did, every choice they made, revolved around it. During my recovery in the hospital, my restaurant staff came to visit regularly, bringing me copies of the Quran in the hopes that I would find comfort in its verses. The local imam stopped by too, offering his perspective, that my accident had been a test from Allah, and my miraculous survival was a clear sign of his favor. Each visit, each well-meaning gesture, struck me like a weight on my chest. It was a reminder of just how enormous the battle ahead of me would be. These weren't bad people. On the contrary, they were sincere in their beliefs, genuinely seeking the truth. But in their zeal, they had been deceived in the same way I had once been. They were living out what I would have lived out in their place, unaware that they were binding themselves even more tightly to a falsehood that would lead them down a tragic path. Those long, quiet hours in the hospital bed became a time of reflection, and it was in those moments of stillness that I began to see things I had never noticed before. I began to understand the deep-rooted fear that underpinned so much of Islamic practice. It wasn't just a fear of hell, it was a fear of being judged by the community, a fear of questioning what you had always been taught, a fear of standing apart from the group. I saw how the daily prayers, the rituals, and the rules were all designed to keep people in line, to suppress any thoughts or doubts that might arise. These practices weren't meant to bring people closer to God. They were meant to keep them in a place of fear and submission. Most telling of all were the reactions of my family when a young Christian nurse, Sarah, would speak to me about her faith. Every time Sarah would gently offer to pray for me or ask if she could share the gospel with me, my family would quickly change the subject or find ways to dismiss her. It was clear they didn't want to entertain any idea that could challenge their deeply held beliefs. There was one instance that particularly stood out to me. Sarah, always kind and respectful, asked if she could pray for me. Yusef, my brother, declined politely but firmly and then spent the next hour reciting Quranic verses aloud, as if trying to shield me from any spiritual contamination. But I noticed something shifting in me. It wasn't just the way I looked at Sarah now. There was something different in the way I looked at the cross on her necklace, something deeper in my soul that felt drawn to it. I could no longer fully participate in the prayers with my family. I no longer felt connected to the rituals that had once been so ingrained in me. One night, when we were alone, Sarah squeezed my hand gently and whispered, "He's real, isn't he?" The tears that welled up in my eyes spoke the answer that my heart already knew. I could only nod, overcome with emotion, as the weight of the truth flooded my soul. He was real, and he had always been real. The physical recovery was grueling. The pain was excruciating, and every day felt like a battle. But nothing compared to the spiritual battle that awaited me. I knew the moment I spoke about my experience, everything would change. My life as I knew it, my comfortable existence, my relationships with my family, my reputation in the community, would all crumble. I knew that sharing my testimony would be like throwing a match onto a powder keg. I had no doubt the response would be one of disbelief, anger, even betrayal. But deep down, I also knew that I couldn't keep this truth to myself any longer. 2 weeks into my hospital stay, Idris, my son, came to visit. Of all my children, Idris had always been the most open-minded, the most willing to question the beliefs we had been raised with. He sat beside me, and after a long silence, he asked, "Mom, did something happen to you? You seem different." I wanted to tell him everything right then and there. My heart longed to pour out the truth, to share with him the miraculous encounter I had experienced. But then I heard Jesus' voice in my heart, soft but firm, saying, "Not yet." Instead, I took a deep breath and asked, "What do you think happens when we die, Idris?" His expression became troubled. "I don't know anymore, Mom. I'm supposed to believe what we've been taught." He trailed off, then quietly whispered, "Sometimes I wonder if we might be wrong." My heart broke as I squeezed his hand. He was right, so right. I could see the confusion in his eyes, the yearning for truth. I told him, "Keep questioning. Keep seeking the truth, no matter where it leads." His gaze softened, as if a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. There was a look of relief, of hope in his eyes that I had never seen before. It was as though, at that moment, a door had been opened. I knew right then that Idris would be one of the first to be ready to hear the truth when the time came. As my strength slowly returned, I began to see how God was orchestrating everything. The accident made me a subject of conversation in the Muslim community. People were already calling my survival a miracle, but they attributed it to the wrong source. They believed it was a sign of Allah's favor, but little did they know, this was only the beginning of a much larger story. When the time came for me to share my testimony, the whole community would be forced to reckon with the reality that I had survived only to renounce the faith I had once so fervently followed. About 3 weeks into my recovery, the dreams began. At night, I would relive the scenes of my death experience. Some nights, I was back in hell, witnessing the souls who had arrived there, too late to realize they had been deceived. Other times, I found myself in the throne room of heaven, basking in the presence of Jesus, overwhelmed by his love and glory. Each dream left me drenched in sweat, my heart racing as the urgency of my mission pressed on me. But there was one dream that shook me to my core. I saw thousands of Muslims, people I knew, standing before the judgment seat. They were confused and terrified, pleading with God, saying, "But we followed all the rules. We prayed 5 times a day, we fasted, we gave zakat, we believed in you, Allah." And then I heard Jesus' voice, clear and sorrowful, "I never knew you. You worship a false god of your own making." The pain of hearing those words was unbearable, especially as I watched my family continue their devotions around me. Fatima, my sister, would come to visit with her baby, my precious granddaughter Nadia, and pray over me in Arabic. Each time she did, I saw flashes of Nadia's future, her being raised in the same deception, passing it on to her children one day, unless someone broke the cycle. The thought of my sweet granddaughter being trapped in that lie broke my heart in ways I couldn't even explain. But I knew that God had positioned me for such a time as this. He had sent me back for a reason, and I was determined to speak the truth, no matter the cost. The doctors were stunned by the incredible progress I made, describing it as nothing short of miraculous. Every day of physical therapy was an agonizing battle, but I fought through the pain with sheer determination. I knew in my heart that I needed to be strong, not just for my survival, but for the spiritual war I would soon have to face. Each step, each small, fragile victory in regaining my mobility, wasn't just about my body. It was a preparation for something far deeper, something that would change my very soul. As my time in the hospital neared its end, I received a visitor I never expected. It was Rebecca, my Christian friend who had spent years trying to share her faith with me. She had been overseas when my accident occurred, but as soon as she returned, she rushed to be by my side. The moment she stepped into my hospital room, I could see it in her eyes. She knew something was different about me. Without hesitation, she softly asked, "You've seen him, haven't you?" Her words pierced through the quiet of the room. I couldn't answer. My emotions overwhelmed me. Tears welled up in my eyes as I nodded in affirmation. In that sacred moment, she held my hand and prayed with me. It was my first genuine Christian prayer, and the peace that filled that room was tangible, like a blanket wrapping around my heart. I had never felt anything like it before. The day before I was discharged, I had one final vision. It was so vivid, so real. I saw myself standing before a vast crowd of Muslims, sharing my testimony, and telling them the truth of what I had seen. Some of them were furious, their faces contorted with anger, while others were moved to tears. A few stood there in stunned silence, wrestling with what I was telling them. Behind every one of them, I saw the shadow of their eternal destiny hanging in the balance. And then, in my mind, I heard Jesus' words, so clear and haunting, "Every soul that believes the lie comes here, every single one." The weight of those words crushed my heart, and I knew that I had been given this opportunity for a reason. That night, with trembling hands, I wrote my first journal entry. I had to document everything, all the experiences, the visions, and the spiritual transformation I had gone through. I needed to preserve it, not just for my strength, but as a testimony to others. As I wrote, I heard a commotion in the hallway. Another patient had passed away. The sound of hurried footsteps and urgent voices, it all brought back the haunting memories of my own near-death experience. I couldn't help but pray for that soul, for the one who had just left this world. I prayed that, like me, they would be granted the chance to know the truth, to see the light before it was too late. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 3 below to let me know that you are still here with me. The next morning, as my family prepared to take me home, I took one last look around my hospital room. The small cross still hung on the wall, a silent testament to everything that had changed in me. What had once been just a decoration now stood as a symbol of my rebirth. I was leaving that place a completely different person from the one who had entered. A broken, dying soul now healed and awakened to a truth I could never have imagined. I knew, deep down, that the real test was about to begin. Leaving the hospital felt like stepping into a new life, but I also knew that I was not walking this path alone. The same Jesus who had brought me back from the brink of death would be by my side, guiding me through whatever trials awaited me. Coming home felt surreal, like a dream I wasn't sure I wanted to wake up from. Everything looked the same. Nothing had changed in the physical world. The Islamic calligraphy still adorned our walls, the prayer rugs were neatly rolled up in the corner, and the Quran still rested on its stand, the same as always. But now, it all looked so different to me. I saw each item as a piece of the web of deception that I had lived under for so long, and my heart ached with the weight of it. That first evening back home, the call to prayer sounded from Yusef's phone, and I didn't get up to pray. Everyone assumed it was because I was still recovering, too exhausted from the injuries and pain. But the truth was, I was silently praying to Jesus. I prayed for wisdom, for the courage to know when and how to share what I had learned. The weight of that secret felt unbearable, but I knew I couldn't keep it hidden forever. The days that followed settled into a routine. My family went about their Islamic rituals as they always had, and I pretended to be absorbed in my recovery. But in truth, I spent hours reading the Bible on my phone, hiding it behind medical recovery websites. Every verse I read was like a revelation, bursting with new meaning, especially those about counting the cost of following Christ. Each page turned was a step further into a world I never thought I'd be part of, but a world I now knew I was meant to embrace. 2 weeks passed, and the weight of my silence became too much to bear. I couldn't delay any longer. One quiet evening, when Idris was upstairs studying and Youssef was watching the news, I decided it was time. My heart raced so fast, I thought it might explode from my chest. "We need to talk," I said, trying to steady my voice. The words felt like rocks in my throat. "About what?" Youssef asked, his voice soft, yet laced with concern. "About what happened when I died." I had no idea how those words would change everything. Over the next 2 hours, I poured out my soul to him. I told him about meeting Muhammad in hell, about encountering Jesus, about discovering the deception of Islam. With every word I spoke, I watched his face shift. First concern, then disbelief, and finally, anger. "It's the medication," he said flatly. "Or maybe brain damage from the fall. We'll get you to a doctor." "No, Youssef," I replied, my voice gentle but firm. "It's the truth. You must have questioned things too, deep down." He stood up so suddenly that his chair crashed to the ground. "Enough!" he shouted, his face twisted with fury. "I won't hear this blasphemy in my house." His anger echoed through the room, drawing Idris downstairs. Our sons stood frozen in the doorway, their faces a mixture of confusion, fear, and, was it relief? Idris didn't say anything, just stood there, as his father continued shouting, insisting that I needed psychiatric help. The look in my son's eyes will haunt me forever. As I reflect on this journey, I'm reminded of how every challenge, every moment of pain, and every step of healing has been a powerful lesson in faith, truth, and resilience. What I've shared with you today is more than just a story. It's a testimony of transformation, of discovering truths that can shake the very foundation of everything you've ever known. So, what have you learned from my experience so far? What is one thing from this story that resonated with you? Something you plan to bring into your own life or put into practice today? I'd love to hear your thoughts, so please, share one lesson you've learned in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video and found it meaningful, don't forget to leave your comment, hit that like button, and share this with anyone who could benefit from it. And of course, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more inspiring content. Thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to hearing from you.